This Basics of Risk Management series is brought to you by Risk Garage. Energizing Risk Workshop. Part 1. Preparation. Let's have a quick look at the risk management process. Identifying risks is a very critical step in risk management. Without understanding the appropriate threats and opportunities for a project, the project team will not be able to manage risks effectively. Risks can be acquired via different techniques, like interviews. But interviews tend to be time-consuming, as the risk engineer has to talk to the individuals in various sessions. And risks may not be discovered extensively due to the silo effect. Putting a group of people in a room tends to trigger good discussion on risks. A risk workshop plays a critical part in risk identification. The definition of workshop in the Oxford Learner's Dictionary is a period of discussion and practical work on a particular subject, in which a group of people share their knowledge and experience. A risk workshop will be a venue where the participants generate risks that will impact the project. A risk workshop is not necessarily putting a big group of people in a room to discuss risks for one whole day. Breakout or subgroup sessions can be organized to provide sharper risk discussion according to themes. This will inject different dimensions into a monotonous one-day session. In order to get the desirable outcomes from a risk workshop, the following point can be implemented. Point number 1. Nominate a risk facilitator. A risk facilitator is the person who manages the flow and pace of a risk workshop. If there is risk focal point assigned to the project, he or she by default will be the risk facilitator. However, in many organizations, risk facilitator is not a full-time job. It is essential to nominate someone who has run a risk workshop before. If there is no suitable candidate within the organization, it can be outsourced to a risk consultant. Then, get 1 or 2 persons from the team to assist the risk expert in the risk workshop. This will help build up the in-house expertise. Point number 2. Understand the objectives of the workshop and the desired outcomes. The risk facilitator will first have a session with the sponsor of risk workshop to understand the objectives of the risk workshop. Without understanding the expectation, there is a risk that another workshop will need to be carried out to bridge any gap. That would mean the participants will have to spend another few hours to identify more risks. After the meeting, the risk facilitator will work on the terms of reference and agenda, and get it endorsed by the sponsor. Point number 3. Understand the project scope. It is advantageous if the risk facilitator has some basic understanding of the project scope. The basic knowledge will enable effective risk discussion with the participants. Of course, he is not expected to understand all the technical stuff in the project. The interesting thing is that sometimes some dumb questions from the risk facilitator would trigger interesting risk discussions among the participants. Point number 4. Determine the length of risk workshop. A risk workshop can last from a few hours to 2 to 3 days. However, the experience tells that the participants will start losing energy and focus when the risk workshop drags too long. An ideal one would be lasting from a few hours to a day. Remember that there are many steps in a risk management process. The advice is not to cover all the steps, but focus on the most impactful one, i.e., identifying risks and their respective risk owners. After the risk workshop, the risk facilitator can then book the times with individual risk owners to assess the risk probabilities and impacts, and plan risk responses. Point number 5. Comb through the risk registers. The risk facilitator should read the current risk register. The purpose is to understand what risks, especially those critical ones, have been identified and worked on. This will help the facilitator to put the focus on new risks during the risk workshop, instead of discussing risks that already exist. The participants are more likely to be intrigued by new risks. Point number 6. Identify the right mix of participants. The mix of participants is subject to what topics to be discussed in the risk workshop. If there are 4 areas of concern to be discussed, it is important to ensure that there are representatives of all the areas in the workshop. Sometimes, a few neutral parties can be invited to provide views of different perspectives. And the optimum size of participants is around 10 to 12. Point number 7. Identify the venue. Ideally, the participants should fully focus on the risk workshop in order to achieve the best outcomes. Therefore, the venue should be away from the office, so that the participants will not be distracted by the day-to-day work. The ambience should be also comfortable and quiet. Snacks and drinks should be provided to energize the participants. Point number 8. Decide format of the workshop. Traditionally, the participants are all present physically in a room throughout the session to provide their risk view. This is still the most effective way of conducting risk workshop. However, since the onset of pandemic, working virtually has been becoming a new norm. Therefore, if not all the participants can attend the session in person, the facilitator needs to ensure that the risk workshop can be done in a hybrid manner. That means video conferencing device will be made available. Of course, it's always good to have a few flipcharts in the room for jotting down brilliant ideas and comments. Also, post-it notes and marker pens or highlighters shall be provided for quick note-taking. Point number 9. Appoint a scribe and a timekeeper. The risk facilitator's job is to ensure the risk discussion actively happens. There are some nitty-gritty things that may distract him. Therefore, it is always advisable to appoint a scribe to record good discussion points, and a timekeeper to ensure all sessions take place as per plan. I hope this video would provide you with some ideas on preparing a risk workshop. If you have other good tips, please leave me a comment below. Thank you, and see you again.